Yá'át'ééh, my relatives. Hello. Today is Thursday, May 5th, and I am sitting down nursing now an iced second cup of coffee. But I wanted to make sure I jumped on today because today is the day remembering missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, and I wanted to make sure that I did something today. And so I want to start. Well, we'll discuss that in a moment, but I wanted just to start by giving my land acknowledgement and acknowledge that I'm speaking to you from the traditional lands of the Piscataway, and I want to honor the Piscataway as the hosts of these lands, thank them for their stewardship of these lands, and just state how humbled I am to be living on these lands today. Um, so if you have been watching the news or paying attention, you'll probably notice that you've been seeing some articles today that May 5th is Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls Day. And this day began actually last year officially, is when President Biden officially named this missing or murdered Indigenous Peoples Day, is I think the official term for it. But I want to share an article with you. This is from the Washington Post, and this ran yesterday, I think it was, just talking about, for those of you, especially outside the Native community, it just gives a lot of details about how the day came about. And obviously, this day is decades in the making, even long before politicians or anyone else got involved. Our Native communities have been crying out for decades that there is a crisis in Indian country where every year hundreds, even thousands of Indigenous women and girls go missing or are reported as murdered, and nothing happens. And so, thankfully, over the past few years, that warning or that issue has come more to the forefront. And in the Washington Post article, I didn't even know some of this. In 2017, Montana Senator Steve Daines and John Tester introduced a resolution designating May 5th as the National Day of Awareness for Missing and Murdered Native Women and Girls. Last year, in 2021, President Biden issued a proclamation formalizing Missing and Murdered Indigenous Persons Awareness Day. Now, just so we don't start getting partisan about this and start saying one side is better than the other, I want to point out that it was in 2019 when President Trump first gave a proclamation about the crisis of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. And so I'm actually grateful that both parties are beginning to give some awareness to this issue. And then for just a basic understanding of why this is such a crisis, the same article in the Washington Post says that in Montana, Native Americans make up about 7% of the state's population, but 26% of its missing persons cases. And the article goes on to state, and this just shows you where and what the crisis is. Indigenous women and girls go missing or are murdered at disproportionately high rates in the United States. According to the Urban Indian Health Institute, homicide is the third leading cause of death among Native American women, and Native women face rates of violence up to 10 times higher than the national average. In 2016, the National Crime Information Center logged 5,712 reports of missing American Indian and Alaska Native women and girls, but the Department of Justice's federal missing persons database logged only 116 cases. That's the crisis. The crisis is that these cases are being reported. Women go missing, children are reported as missing or even murdered, and nothing happens. No case is opened, nothing is done with the report that's made, and it literally just sits there. And if you search this issue, you will find story after story after story after story of Native families and communities who have had to go out themselves searching for their missing or murdered Indigenous women and girls. And so over this time, red has become one of the colors used to raise awareness for this issue. And even today, I have my sieth, my Navajo bun, tied in red yarn as a remembrance and acknowledgement of the ongoing crisis throughout Indian country, missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. And so again, this has been a crisis going on for decades, longer than that. And it just in the past, maybe not even 10 years, has begun to get some traction within mainstream America. But in Indian country, these issues have been we've been very acutely aware of these issues going on for an incredibly long time. And I want to give some acknowledgement to Deb Haaland. Secretary Haaland is doing an amazing job of raising awareness about this issue. In fact, she is right now on the Department of Justice, on the Department of the Interior's website, doing a live stream. I was watching it for a little while, which is why I'm starting a few minutes later here. But she's doing a live stream talking about the commission that they're starting to address this issue, and saying what she's been doing to help bring this issue to the forefront. I believe they're interviewing and asking some Native leaders, some Native leaders from Native nations to come and speak. And so she's been doing a lot, not just today, but through her office and through the sphere of her influence, to bring this issue more and more to the forefront. And so my deeply respect and am very, very grateful to Secretary Haaland and the work she is doing to raise this issue to the forefront. I see Patty Shield is on with us today. Shantina is here. Cheryl Lewis. I want to thank everybody for joining this. We're talking about missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. And I wanted to especially talk about the proclamation that was issued today. And I'm going to share that in the comment section here. And so the White House yesterday released the proclamation for today, and they're calling it the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Persons Awareness Day of 2022. And I'm actually going to share my screen, and I want to just read the proclamation today. And then I want to discuss a few things about this issue that's been going on. So let me go ahead and share my screen with you. And then I will read some of this proclamation. So this came out of the White House yesterday on May 4th, 2022. And I will read the proclamation. It's titled, "A Proclamation on Missing or Murdered Indigenous Persons Awareness Day 2022. For generations, Indigenous persons, including American Indians, Alaska Natives, and Native Hawaiians, have been forced to mourn a missing or murdered loved one without the answers and support they deserve. On Missing or Murdered Indigenous Persons Awareness Day, we remember these victims and their families and commit to working with tribal nations and Native communities to achieve justice and healing. The federal government has an obligation to ensure that cases of missing or murdered persons are met with swift and effective action. My administration is fully committed to investigating and resolving these cases through a coordinated law enforcement response, as well as intervention and prevention efforts. We are also dedicated to researching the underlying causes of this violence and to working with Native communities to address them. The safety and well-being of all Native Americans continues to be a top priority for my administration. That is why during my first year in office at the first White House Tribal Nations Summit, I issued an executive order directing federal agencies to improve public safety and criminal justice for Native Americans and to address the crisis of missing or murdered Indigenous people. This includes implementing a coordinated federal law enforcement strategy that supports tribal and other local law enforcement efforts. It also strengthens prevention, early intervention, and survivor services while improving data collection, analysis, and information sharing. For far too long, justice for Indigenous communities has been elusive. We must improve our investigations to resolve missing or murdered cases while supporting victims and their families. Towards that aim, the Department of Justice is working closely with tribal nations to develop regionally appropriate guidelines for these cases. The Department of Justice has created a dedicated steering committee to oversee and coordinate this critical work, including outreach services liaison for federal criminal cases in Indian country. This March, I signed into law the Violence Against Women's Act Reauthorization Act of 2022. This important law extends special criminal jurisdiction of tribal courts to cover non-native perpetrators of sexual assault, child abuse, stalking, sex trafficking, and assaults on tribal law enforcement officers on tribal lands, and supports the development of a pilot project to enhance access to safety for survivors in Alaska Native villages. My administration understands that Native peoples, particularly survivors of violence, know best what their communities need to feel safe. That is why we must work hand in hand with tribal partners through each phase of the justice system to create solutions that are victim-centered, trauma-informed, and culturally appropriate. Our nation's failure to address this ongoing tragedy not only demeans the dignity of each Indigenous person who goes missing or is murdered, it undermines the humanity of us all. Today and every day, we must continue to stand up for Indigenous peoples, and we must never forget the thousands of unsolved cases that continue to cry out for justice and healing. As a nation, we must answer the call and work together to achieve the promise of America for all Americans. For I, Joseph R. Biden Jr., President of the United States of America, by virtue of the authority vested in me by the Constitution and the laws of the U.S., do hereby proclaim May 5th, 2022 as Missing or Murdered Indigenous Persons Awareness Day. I call on Americans and on all Americans, all levels of government, to support tribal governments and the tribal community's efforts to increase awareness to the issue of missing or murdered Indigenous persons through appropriate programs and activities. In witness whereof, I have hereunto set my hand this 4th day of May in the year of our Lord 2022, and of the independence of the United States of America 246. President Joseph R. Biden Jr. So that is the proclamation that the White House issued today. And I think there's a few good things that are in there, right? I deeply appreciate the coordination between different agencies. I appreciate the creation of these commissions. I'm very grateful of just even the fact that there's a proclamation drawing attention to these sorts of issues and trying to make people more aware of them. I'm very grateful for that. I'm grateful that not only is the Biden administration doing this, but I was grateful also that the Trump administration was also bringing some awareness to this, because regardless of partisanship or party politics, this is an issue that needs the full attention of our nation. And I'm grateful to see both Republicans and Democrats drawing attention to this issue. I'm also just very, very grateful for Deb Haaland and for her ongoing efforts to raise awareness about these things. And I want to share with you an article that I read on Native News Online. And just so you're aware of all the things that are going on regarding missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, or missing or murdered Indigenous persons, Native News Online just created kind of a list of activities going on throughout the day and even throughout the week in regards to this issue. And I encourage you to look at this website and look at all of the things that are happening, all of the events that are taking place, all of the proclamations, all the things that are happening to draw attention and to try to bring this crisis to an end. And so I'm deeply grateful for everyone who is helping to raise some of this awareness. I also want to give a few critiques. And I got online today and I just did some searching to see who was tweeting about and who was talking about missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. And I noticed that there were a lot of agencies and a lot of people and a lot of even news sources that were sharing the proclamation made by the White House about missing or murdered Indigenous Persons Awareness Day. And I was grateful to see that. I was disappointed that Joe Biden, through either of his two Twitter accounts, had not bothered to tweet out or mention about his signing of this proclamation and the awareness that he's trying to bring. And I want to talk about why that is significant, right? Because yes, he's the president, and I know there's a lot of things on his plate, but and it's good that he made this proclamation. He signed this bill. It's in the archives, and it's becoming a part of the institution. Those are all very good things. But what we need, and what we have never really had, even President Obama didn't do this, which is we need a leader. We need leaders like Deb Haaland, who are able to stand up and not just sign these sorts of proclamations or do these sorts of things within these institutional spaces, but to promote them loudly with the full strength of their platform, to compel media and the nation and the general public to be aware of these things. And so the fact that President Biden has not tweeted about this, has not shared this out on social media, has not tried to use his platform to draw attention to this, his own personal voice, is disappointing for me. Because that's what's missing from bringing this to a higher level. And I would really like to see that. I would really like to see our leaders, like Deb Haaland is doing. If you go and look at, I'm actually going to show you Deb Haaland's Twitter page, because it's pretty impressive what she's doing, right? If you go to Deb Haaland's Twitter page, you see she's been tweeting about this throughout the week. She's been raising these issues and talking about this. She had a whole thread about it earlier today. And she is using her platform to raise awareness about this issue, and she's doing everything she can as the Secretary of the Interior to get our nation and our media talking about these sorts of things. And so if we could have more of our leaders doing this type of thing, this would really help elevate this issue to the next level. It's good to have proclamations, right? It's good to have these things on the books and in the archives, but it's even better to have it being repeated and trumpeted loudly by our leaders from their pulpits, from their platforms. And that's what we're not getting yet, right? Even President Obama, right? Remember when he signed the apology to Native American peoples that was buried in the Department of Defense Appropriations Act, and he never talked about it, right? He signed it and slipped it into this bill and never talked about it. And the challenge is our nation doesn't know how to talk about these things. We don't know how to have these discussions, and we need leaders who are willing to use their pulpits, to use their platforms, to introduce these points of conversation into the public dialogue, into the national discourse. And that's not happening yet. And so while I appreciate the fact that we have a proclamation, we even have an awareness day, those are good things. Now we need to actually get this into the public discourse. We need to get the public talking about these things. We need to get the media talking about these things. I'm actually going to share again just one thing, just as a point of reference for those of you who have been paying attention. Here is the first proclamation that President Trump gave in 2019 on missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, just so you'll have that also as a point of reference. And again, I want to make sure we don't turn this into a partisan issue. We need both sides of the aisle talking about this issue, not only signing proclamations, but bringing it into their pulpits and into their platforms where they discuss these things. So anyway, those are my thoughts. I want to thank everybody for joining me today to talk about these things. And I want to kind of end on a bit more of a lighter note if we can. But if you've been watching, yesterday obviously was May 4th. And of course, people have been talking about May the 4th be with you. And if you follow me on social media, you'll probably notice I tweeted a picture out last night. And let me just bring that up. So I was actually hoping I could find this picture, but I knew I couldn't find it on my computer, but I knew I had it in Facebook, and so I went back through the archives of my Facebook page, and I found it yesterday. This picture, which I tweeted out yesterday and put on my Facebook and Instagram, this is me at the June 30th world premiere of Star Wars: A New Hope that was dubbed into Navajo. And so the director of the Navajo Nation Museum, Manuelito Wheeler, who is a friend of mine, he does a lot of work to work with studios around the country to dub movies into Denebizad, into our Navajo language. And he had been working for over a decade, I think, to get Star Wars dubbed into Navajo. This was the first movie I think he got. And they did a Navajo Nation premiere. I think it was on July 4th or July 3rd. It might have been at the fair. They showed it outdoors in the stadium. But a few days earlier, they had a more private screening that they were giving out tickets for, and I was able to win some tickets to go there. And so at the El Morro Theater in Gallup, New Mexico, they had the premiere of this movie, Star Wars, that was dubbed into Navajo. And you'll see me standing there, right? I have my more traditional, it's a lighter color, almost a tan color, a velvet shirt on. I have my Navajo necklace on. I'm holding a lightsaber. And then when I got there, there was another Navajo woman who was there who was dressed as Princess Leia. And so we were, you can't see the poster in the background, but we were standing in front of this poster right there, right, with Luke Skywalker holding up his lightsaber and Princess Leia kind of standing next to him in this poster. And so we were trying to recreate that in this photo here. And so that's what we were doing. And so I was looking for those photos. I knew I had done that a few when that premiered, but I couldn't find the pictures anywhere until I found them on Facebook. So I'm going to go ahead and share that picture out here on Facebook from both Facebook and Twitter. If you'd like to see those as well, let me put these into the and I'm also going to give you, I want to give you an article. And this is about the story of how the dubbing of Star Wars into Navajo came about. And this is actually I think it's on the official Star Wars website. It's titled, "It Shattered the World's Perception, the Story of the Navajo Language Dub of Star Wars: A New Hope." And it talks about the work that Manuelito Wheeler did to make this happen. And so I'm going to share that with you as well. And so, yeah, it's just kind of a fun story. So since yesterday was May 4th, May the 4th be with you, I thought that would be kind of a fun thing to just share with you and talk about a little bit. But I want to thank everybody for joining me today. I hope and encourage you to do something today to commemorate and acknowledge and honor the ongoing crisis of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. Share something on your social media, join one of these events that are going on online, do something in your local community, but let's make sure we work hard to continue to raise awareness of this issue throughout our country. So it's not something that's just talked about in Indian country and within Native circles, but it's something our whole nation becomes very acutely aware of. I want to thank all of you for joining me here. I get a lot of questions. I want to share one other thing. So tomorrow, over my second cup of coffee, I'm going to be having a conversation with Adrian Wallace. Now, those of you who followed me during my campaign for president in 2020, you will recognize Adrian Wallace. He was my vice presidential candidate, and he lives in Lexington, Kentucky. and he is actually currently running for mayor of Lexington, Kentucky. And so tomorrow he's going to join me for my second cup of coffee. We're going to have a conversation about our relationship and our experience of running for president. We're going to talk about some other issues as well as some things about his campaign he's running right now. But I welcome you to join us tomorrow. This will be around 11 a.m. Eastern time, where Adrian and I will have our second cup of coffee right here. And we'll talk about his campaign and our relationship and what we've been doing and what our experience have been running together. For those of you who like what I'm doing here, I encourage you to subscribe to my YouTube channel. And it's Wirelesshogan is my YouTube channel. I just put the link right there. Even if you watch this live stream on Facebook does not do a good job of archiving videos. And so if you subscribe to my YouTube channel, you'll be able to get a much better archive of not only my second cups of coffee, but other things that I'm doing and putting up on my social media. And so I welcome you and invite you to subscribe to me on YouTube. And of course, if you're interested, you can always get a copy of the book that I'm writing, which is Unsettling Truths, the ongoing dehumanizing legacy of the doctrine of discovery. And if you've been following me on social media, you know that I actually launched my 2022 Unsettling Truths book tour. Earlier this week on Tuesday, I was in New York City, and we had our inaugural event of the 2022 Unsettling Truths book tour launch. And I spoke at, I was sponsored by a church in New York City called Hope Hell's Kitchen. And we had an event in New York City, and it was a great event. And had people show up. I talked about the book for about an hour. We did some Q&A and then had a book signing afterwards. And this is the first of what I'm hoping will actually be dozens of events around the country. So next week I'm traveling to Portland, Oregon, and I have some meetings in Portland, Oregon on the 14th, which is a Saturday. And then on Sunday, I'm going to be preaching at a church in Portland called Great Spirit. It's a United Methodist Church. And then on Monday, the 16th, at the Latte Cafe, I think it's called, I'm going to be doing a book tour event where I'll be talking about the book. We'll have some signed copies of the book available. And so that will be in Portland, Oregon at 6 p.m. on May 16th. And so if you are interested in both learning more about this book tour or even helping me sponsor it, because I'm not doing these events at the invitation of anyone, because I don't have any publicist or PR agency behind me helping me do this book tour, all of this is just coming out of my own pocket. And so if you are interested in helping me sponsor this book tour, I started a GoFundMe the other day, which you're welcome to help sponsor the expenses to cover this book tour and the travel and the things that need to happen to make that book tour happen. And then finally, if you like what we're doing here and you'd like to help support it, I welcome you to subscribe to my work on Patreon. And so we started a Patreon site about 3 months ago. It was in January of this year, 2022. And so we have a Patreon site that you can subscribe to, and there's new content coming out on Patreon specifically for Patreon or for Patreon First every month. And so look through the tiers and what we're doing. And I welcome you, if you like the work I'm trying to do on my YouTube and Facebook channels, I welcome you to subscribe to me on Patreon and support the work that I'm doing to make this content and get it available to as many people as possible. So, yeah, my relatives, I thank you for joining me for my second cup of coffee. I invite you to join me tomorrow at 11 a.m. for my conversation with Adrian Wallace. And I hope that you will do something today to acknowledge publicly the ongoing crisis in Indian country of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. Yeah, my relatives, walk in beauty, and may we learn how to walk in beauty together. Hakon that.